Hi there, data scamps and data champs. This is Richie. We're going to kick off in just a few moments' time. In the meantime, please do let us know where you're joining from in the chat, and also take a moment to familiarize yourself with the AirMeet interface if you haven't used it before. So, as well as chat, we also have a Q&A feature. We're going to be doing Q&A at the end. So, if you have questions, please ask them. Even if you don't have a question yourself, you can also upvote other people's questions, and we're going to be going through the highest voted questions at the end. All right, let me see who we've got so far. Valentine is joining from the Netherlands. Welcome, Valentine. And just one of you responding so far. Oh, we have a few more people. So Nathia is joining from Cape Town, South Africa. Thomas is joining from Portsmouth in the UK. Always nice to see a global audience. For the rest of you, please do tell us where you're joining from as well. Who else we got? We've got Natasha from Atlanta, Bonventure from Kenya. I remember that name. Good to see returning webinar guests. Elizabeth joining from PEI in Canada. I'm not sure where that is. It sounds like an island. Prince Edward, maybe? I'm guessing that's Prince Edward Island. All right, very nice. Winston's joining from Tanzania. Victoria's joining from Canada. And Shannon's joining from the UK. Wonderful. All right. Glad to have you all on board. With that, we're going to kick off because I'm too excited. I never have the patience to wait for these things. All right. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware, data warehouses kind of move to the cloud. They're incorporating all kinds of fancy AI features. They're becoming big, very cool things. And Snowflake is one of the most popular platforms of this. I've been in trouble with the marketing team before for calling it data warehouse. It's a cloud AI platform, I think is the official term. Anyway, we're going to be learning about Snowflake today, and specifically, we're going to be learning about the data engineering aspects of Snowflake. So that means things like building data pipelines, and in general, sort of crunching about moving data from one place to another. I'm not sure whether I've just overly simplified data engineering there, but that's the kind of gist of it. And in order to teach you how to do this, we're going straight to the source. So our guest is Gilberto Hernandez. He is a lead developer advocate at Snowflake itself. Welcome, Gilberto. His job is to create educational content for modern data engineering. He also organizes the Snowflake Developer Days. And prior to Snowflake, he was building developer education experiences at MongoDB, Code Academy, Plaid, and Domino Data Lab. So he's very well toured around all the kind of hot startups. He's been educating developers for about a decade or so, and he loves all things developer education, developer experience education. All right, super. Welcome, Gilberto. I'm gonna let you take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Richie. Really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here today. So, as Richie mentioned, I'm Gilberto. I'm a developer advocate at Snowflake, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. We're going to be talking about all things data engineering with Snowflake. Now, we have quite a bit to cover today and about 45 minutes or so. So, what I'd like to do is just kind of dive right in and get into today's webinar. So, a bit of background on myself before we dive in. So, Richie touched on this a little bit, but I've been in the space of developer education for about a decade now. And really, what developer education and developer experience means is really being at the center of going directly to the builders and providing them with the resources to be able to upskill or learn how to use new technology. So, I've written many online courses, a lot of tutorials online, sample GitHub repos, events such as these, and events in person. So, really, that entire spectrum of being able to go directly to the folks who are putting their hands on the keyboard and actually trying to build something. And so, today, we're going to be talking about how to do data engineering specifically with Snowflake. All right, so here's what I'm planning on covering today. So, what is data engineering? And so, a quick note before we dive in, if you are a data analyst today and maybe you're an aspiring data engineer, this is the perfect session for you because you'll get some overview on what data engineering is. And then, second, if you're a data engineer today and maybe you're not using Snowflake, but you want to add a new tool, a new platform to your technical repertoire, this is also a great session for you. So I'll cover what is data engineering. I'll talk about a framework for understanding data pipelines. Spoiler alert, data pipelines are what's built as part of data engineering by data engineers. We'll go into more detail on that in a bit. I'll cover how Snowflake excels at data engineering. It's one of its many superpowers. And then we're going to try to do something very ambitious in the latter half of this session today, which is try to build an end-to-end data pipeline in Snowflake in 30 minutes. And I'm going to walk you through everything. And I'm going to start from scratch, just like you would if you are interested in following along, so you can see it can be done. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Here's a slide that our legal department makes us show really quickly. All right, so to start, what exactly is data engineering? So a few years back, Snowflake published a book called Cloud Data Engineering for Dummies, Snowflake Special Edition. And in there were a few sentences that I think do a good job of capturing the essence of data engineering, kind of like what data engineers do. So it reads, Data engineer data engineering is the effort required to create data pipelines that automate the transfer of data from place to place and transform that data into a specific format for a certain type of analysis. So it's more of an ongoing practice. It's not something that you do once. You can expect to continuously collect data, transform data, and deliver data. So, a few sentences there really captures the essence of data engineering, what data engineers do, and pipelines. But I think there are a few words here that really pop off the page. And so I want to highlight them really quickly. So, for example, transfer of data, transforming data, collecting data. Again, you'll see transforming and then delivering data. You start to see and recognize patterns here for this definition of or this practice of data engineering, if you will. And there are a couple words here that I think speak to like the living nature of pipelines. So ongoing and automate. And this really kind of illustrates how data pipelines, yes, you can build one, but they, really robust pipelines would be automated and can kind of continue to live and persist on their own as much as possible. And then, of course, I highlight here data pipelines, right? So the term data pipelines, which again is what we're going to build and what data engineers do in the practice of data engineering. Now, if you take these kind of words and try to abstract them away to kind of understand in more context, like how a data pipeline is built, you can come up with a framework that will help you contextualize data pipelines and understand their different parts and exactly what is moving in a data pipeline. And so that framework is the ITD framework for data pipelines, where the I stands for ingestion, the T stands for transformation, and the D stands for delivery. And really, what I'm trying to get at in each of these phases is that for ingestion, I'm simply referring to loading data into Snowflake. And then for transformation, you may have heard phrases like cleaning, wrangling, integrating, basically acting against that data. For transformation, I'm specifically referring to SQL, Python, and any kind of other Snowflake ways for transforming your data. And then last but not least, delivery speaks to delivering like a final polished end data product. And there are several different ways of doing this in Snowflake today. And so that's the ITD framework. I'm going to be touching quite a bit on it as we build our pipeline later today. And you can use this framework more as a map. If you are presented with a brand new pipeline and you're trying to figure out, what exactly is this part of the pipeline doing, ITD can help orient you. And so that's kind of a way that you can break down pipelines to understand them a bit more in detail. Today we're talking about Snowflake for data engineering. So before I even show, how Snowflake supports data engineering, heads up, Snowflake can support many. It has many strengths. I like to think of it as the AI data platform for all of your data needs. And when I say all of your data needs, this is because Snowflake excels in many categories. So if you've heard of Snowflake, maybe you've heard of it being used, let's say, for enterprise analytics. That's one use case where it definitely shines. But it also has strengths in machine learning, data science, application development, generative AI, and then of course data engineering. So that's kind of like the spectrum of all the strengths. And there are many more, but those are the core strengths of Snowflake. And so today we're going to be talking about data engineering. So let me show you this quick mind map of how Snowflake supports data engineering in the context of the ITD framework. And heads up, you're going to see quite a bit here. So as you can see, there are a lot of features here as part of each of the pieces of the ITD framework. We're not going to go because this is, an hour webinar. We're definitely not going to have time to go into detail on all of these. But I did want to kind of give you this map to highlight that for ingestion, you have many different options for getting data into Snowflake. We're going to focus on a couple of these today. I'll give you more detail in a bit. Transformation, I can't even begin to scratch the surface here. There are all sorts of objects and ways of transforming your data in Snowflake. What we're going to focus on is this central idea of one compute engine. So all of your data being in Snowflake, not having to move it anywhere, and then being able to use SQL, Python, and many other languages to actually transform your data. And also use data frame APIs, which you might be familiar with if you're coming from, say, a Python background. So using data frame APIs to transform your data. Then for delivery, all sorts of different ways for getting a final polished end product to an end user or a system. And then down at the bottom, you'll see the developer experience, developer experiences in DevOps. So a variety of tools to be able to expedite and streamline your processes for building pipelines. So you can see notebooks. Snowflake has its own version of notebooks inside of Snowflake, supports IPyNB files. There's an official VS Code extension. If you're a Python fan and you want to programmatically operate Snowflake with APIs or Python APIs for that, and then several other things here, but we're not going to touch on this. In fact, for today's lab, let me show you what we're going to be touching on. So we have to skim this down a bit just to be able to fit everything. We're going to be focusing on a couple of things in ingestion. So the copy into command, this is a tried and true command for getting data into Snowflake. And then the marketplace, probably the easiest way to get data into your account. For transformation, we're going to focus on user-defined functions. I'll provide more detail on that in a bit. I touched on the one compute engine aspect. We're going to use a lot of SQL today. I do have a Python-based notebook for you in the repo that I'll share. We're not going to be able to run it today just in the interest of time, but I did want to give you that option so that you can run it on your own if you are interested in seeing how to use Python with Snowflake. And then last but not least, we're actually going to build a Streamlit and Snowflake application today to deliver our final end product. All right, so with that, we can dive right in. So again, a very ambitious goal of building a data pipeline in Snowflake in 30 minutes. So what exactly are you going to need today? Some of you may have already done this. So if you're interested in following on, you'll need a free 30-day Snowflake trial account. Some of you may have already signed up for this. That's what I was referring to. But don't worry about doing that now. I'm actually going to go through that entire flow with you. So you can see I'm starting from scratch. I'm using a brand new trial account just like you are. And you can see that what I'm building is also possible in the demo account that you'll also spin up. Then I have this GitHub repo, which contains the code that we'll use today. Now, this is mostly for the purposes of convenience, but if you're not able to follow along today and maybe you want to follow along on your own at a later time, all the code from today's webinar is in this repo. And you should have both links already available to you. If you go into the chat and scroll to the very top, I believe the links are there already. Okay, so let me just quickly, what exactly, let me describe what we're going to be building today. We're going to build an end-to-end pipeline to track weather for a specific use case. So you can imagine that you are a data engineer that works for a company called Tasty Bites. Now, Tasty Bites is a global food truck company with over 450 food trucks all over the world. They're selling all sorts of items to customers in many different cities. And we have a suspicion from our analysts that we've heard that for some reason in the month of February, the sales in the city of Hamburg, Germany dropped to zero. And we want to understand why, and we want to be able to provide our analysts with up-to-date information on the city so that they can help better operate those food trucks in the city of Hamburg, Germany, to make sure that they're not wasting time, that they actually are putting food trucks out there when folks are going to go visit. So the three components of the framework, ITD, ingestion, transformation, delivery, What are we going to do for ingestion? We're going to take weather data from the Snowflake marketplace. We're going to take sales data from an AWS S3 bucket. So those are 2 ways that we'll get data into Snowflake. For transformations, SQL, a hint of Python. I'll just give you the notebook that you can run on your own. We're going to create some views and some user-defined functions. And then finally, again, we'll build a Streamlit application in Snowflake. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Again, don't worry about signing up for the account in advance. If you have, great. I'm going to go through everything and show you exactly how to do it. You can see that the links to the trial account have been dropped into the chat. Also, the code in the GitHub repo, that's also in the chat. All right, what about HTML files or Excel files? Yeah, I can definitely get to more of that once we talk a little bit more about ingestion. But for now, in the interest of time, I want to dive into getting our account set up. All right, so let me go ahead and show you. Oops, share this tab. All right, so here's a GitHub link. It's on Snowflake Labs. You can get there by just typing in github.com/Snowflake Labs. And once you're there, you can you can search for Snowflake Data Camp Gilberto. We have 3 folders. Each of these folders corresponds to one of the pieces of the framework, if you will, one of the phases of the framework. So this is how it's organized. So keep that handy in a tab because you'll need to refer to it. And then we're going to sign up for a trial account. And so again, signup.snowflake.com. I'm going to type this in again, signup.snowflake.com. And so you'll have this modal here. Let's go ahead and start filling this out. So Gilberto H, work email, gilberto.hernandez@snowflake.com. Why are you signing up? Mostly for training, or sorry, personal learning, I should say. And continue. So company name, I'm going to just enter Snowflake, job title, dev advocate. Now, if you've already done these next 2 parts, not a big deal. But if you haven't done it yet, I would leave this set to enterprise. It's the most popular option. It's going to have everything that you need. And then as far as cloud provider, I'm going to pick AWS. And then in the region, I'm going to pick US West. And just the only reason I'm doing this is because I frequently open them on AWS. And I know that in US West, sometimes, but not all the time, the newest features in Snowflake tend to land in this region first. Again, that's just for some, not all of them. So if you are interested in having this region, you can select it here. Just a note, if you've already gone to create your trial account in advance of this, and this is not the cloud provider or the region that you picked, it's not a big deal. You can still do everything in today's lab, but just note that you can't go back and change it. So AWS and US West Oregon is what I'm going to be picking. I'm going to click here. I've agreed to the terms. All right, get started. I'm going to skip this survey. And now it says check your inbox. Going to probably have to wait a little bit for the activation email to show up. Okay, mine came in pretty quickly. Of course, I'm not going to share my inbox, but just know I'm in my Gmail inbox. And I have an email with a button that says click to activate. So I'm just going to copy that link address just so that you can follow along. I'm going to paste it up here. Give me a quick second. So copy link address. All right, well, I'll just do this manually. So I've clicked on it. I'm going to share my tab here. And it's saying, go ahead and select a username. So I'm just going to put Gilberto and my password. So I'm just going to come up with a password here. Hopefully that works. Okay, I think that works now. Oh, sorry. Let me try something new. This ought to work. Can't, okay, I see. It's not long enough. All right, here we go. Hopefully these match. Okay. So while you do that, Snowflake will load up and you'll have this modal here that will give you prompt you for a tour. We're going to skip that for now. And then here you can land at the home page where there are lots of different ways here to get started. So you have projects here, you have some quick actions, you have the main menu that you're going to interact with is here on the left. And now we can go ahead and get started. So, all right, I mentioned that we are going to be getting data from two different places. One is the marketplace, the other is from an S3 bucket. Let's start with the marketplace. So here's what we're going to do. On the left, click on data products, then click on marketplace. And the Snowflake marketplace, just to give you a heads up, is probably the easiest way to get data into your account. So what you'll find on here, it's almost like an app store, but instead of finding just one thing, you'll find data sets, you'll find applications that have been written by other folks that are in the Snowflake ecosystem and cloud, and you can search for them and then bring them into your account. Now, some listings are free, some are paid. Today, we're going to go with a free data set. So I'm going to type in weather source, zoom in a bit, weather source frost bite. Make sure you put a Y in bite. I'm going to click enter here. And you'll see that the very top one is called Weather Source LLC Frostbite. I'll click on this option here. And you'll be taken here to the listing for the data set. And here's what I love about data sets from the marketplace. Well, this one, of course, is free, as you can see here, but they are completely maintained by the provider. So in this case, Weather Source LLC. So this means I don't need to worry about keeping it fresh. I don't need to write any SQL to maintain it. I simply go and click get and bring it into my account. And keeping it fresh and updated is up to the provider. And they're frequently checking in on the data because they have folks that are using it right for various reasons. And so these data sets, oftentimes, they're going to be kept up to date and you don't have to worry about doing anything to them. So on the right here, I'll click on get. You don't have to modify anything here. I'm just going to click on get. And now it's ready to use. So I just did 2 clicks and now I have data in my account. You can click on this button to query the data. I'm not going to do it, but I'm just going to click on done here. I'm going to show you where that data was actually place. So you can see a database here called Weather Source LLC Frostbite. This little icon indicates that it's a data share. If you expand it, you'll see there are some schemas in here. I'm going to open up the on-point ID schema. The database is kind of like, you can think of it as like the parent folder where everything will live. It's not a folder, but I'm trying to use an analogy here. And then schemas are kind of like subfolders within a directory for organizing data. So here's the on-point ID schema. You see that this schema has views and lots of data here. You don't need to query this, but you can preview it if you want. The columns, the data, right? So that's the first set of data that we're going to get. So we went to the marketplace, quickly found some data, and we're going to use it to build our pipeline. The next thing that we're going to do is actually pull in data from an AWS S3 bucket. And so what you need to do now is click on projects and then click on worksheets. And then go ahead and click on new worksheet by clicking on that blue plus button at the top right. This modal, you can, it gives you some tips here on how to operate a worksheet. I'm going to close it up for now because I'm going to help you anyway. And we're going to start writing some SQL in here. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Before we operate this worksheet, you'll need to set your context, but you can see that we already have a few of those things already set up. So account admin, make sure your role is set to account admin. You can leave your compute warehouse as is. We, of course, need to select a database. we don't have the database yet where we're going to pull our data into, so we're going to create it. So what we're going to do here is type in create or replace tasty underscore bytes. Oops, I forgot. Create or replace database, of course. It's called tasty bytes. Take note of how this is typed in because the rest of the code does use this object name, so we don't want to run into any errors with typos. So create or replace database tasty bytes, and then inside of that database we're going to create a schema. So create or replace schema, and we're going to create a schema called raw POS. All right, so I'm going to run each of these statements individually. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put my cursor on line 1, and then you can just hit the play button. Or if you like keyboard shortcuts, you can do command return if you're on a Mac. So I'll run that. You can see the database was created. And then I'll do the same thing for line 2. Create or replace schema, raw POS. And then if I go over here to the object picker and I refresh, you'll see that the database is there with a schema in here called raw POS. These other two schemas are kind of our default schemas that are created for all databases. So you don't need to worry about them for now, but raw POS. And you can see that our context is now using that database. So tasty bytes raw POS. All right. So if you are interested in moving a little bit faster and you don't want to type this out from scratch, what you can do is you can navigate to the GitHub repo, and inside of this first folder, 00 ingest, we have the boilerplate code copy into that we can copy and go back and take into Snowflake. So again, that's the folder 00 ingest. The file's called copy into SQL. If you want just a solution, you can go into the solution folder and it has what we're going to type, but we're going to do this by hand, at least just to get started, so you can get some experience writing some SQL and then loading some data using that copy into command. So I've already gone ahead and copied this code. I'm going to go back to my account and I'm going to place it in here. And you can see I've left some helper notes in here. So create a CSV file format here, some comments here. So what exactly are we going to do? The data that we need to load into Snowflake is in AWS in an S3 bucket. It is a bunch of CSV files. And the way that we're going to load this is by creating this stage here, which I've already done. I've already provided you the code for. Creating this stage here that points to the address of the S3 bucket. And then we're going to specify a file format. We're just saying, hey, the files in here are CSVs. We're going to create a target table to load the data into, and then we're going to write the copy into command to actually take that data from S3 and pump it into that table that we just defined, that target table. So let's go ahead and do this. So the first thing, it says create a CSV file format here. So on line 5, create or replace. You'll notice that you'll use this command a lot. File format, and then now just give it a name. Again, careful here with how you spell things. So tasty bytes, I'm saying that I want this file format to live inside of tasty bytes, specifically inside the public schema. And then now I'm going to give it a name. So I'm just going to call it CSV underscore FF. You can call it whatever you want. Just make sure that you use it in a later step. I'll show you exactly what I mean in a bit. So that's it. I've created a file format. It's called CSV file. Oh, actually, I'm not done. I need to specify the type of file format. So on the next line, type equals CSV. Now I'm done. I'm going to put my cursor on line 5. I'm going to run it. So you can see the file format has been successfully created. The stage needs to know what the file format is. So on line 11, so under the URL, all we have to do is specify the file format that we just created. So we say file underscore format equals, and then you can just type in the whole thing that we just wrote on line 5, specifically the path to the file format. So I'm going to type in tasty bites dot public dot csv underscore ff semicolon. All right, I'm going to run this command. You can see that my stage called S3 load has been created. We have a table here. I've already provided the code for you. If you just put your cursor on line 14 and run this, it'll create the table for you. You can see here it has several different columns. Here they're data types, and I'm going to go ahead and click run. And now that table has been created. So if I just refresh here, here's that table. It doesn't have any data. As you can see, number of rows is 0 because we haven't loaded anything into it. And the reason we haven't is because we haven't yet used the copy into command. So let's go ahead and now actually use our copy into command to bring the data that's in the S3 bucket into that table. So copy into, we want to copy into the table that we just created. So we're going to type in tasty bites dot raw underscore POS dot country. So I'm just using the autocomplete here. I'm going to hit enter. On the next line, I'm going to type from, and now I need to specify the path to where that file or that data lives. So I'm going to say at tasty bites dot public dot s3 load. So that's just the path to the stage that we just created. In fact, let me see if I can refresh here. It's in the public schema. See, we have a stage here called S3 load. So all I did was just type in the path to that stage. And then in that stage, in that bucket on S3, we have a folder, we have a directory called raw underscore POS. Then we have another folder called country. All right. Semicolon. So this is the copy into command. This is a super powerful command. And again, we're using it to load data from Snowflake load data from an S3 bucket into Snowflake. I'm going to put my cursor on line 26 and go ahead and hit command enter. And as you can see, I have this message here. This file, which was a compressed CSV file, was loaded. It only had 30 rows. And yeah, here's some more metadata if you're interested in that. We don't need to dive into that. If I refresh this, hover over country, and actually just refresh one more time, click on country. Looks like it hasn't updated, but I can always just go here. I went ahead and opened it in a new tab. Give me a quick second. All right, and you can see it has 30 rows in here. So here are the columns. Here's a data preview. All right, so that was just me opening it up in a new tab. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my previous tab. So I'm going to share this tab instead. Oops, I think I lost you guys. 1 second. All right, here we are. All right, so we've gone ahead and loaded data from the marketplace and from an S3 bucket. The next thing that we need to do, so we only loaded a tiny little table that has 30 rows. We actually need to load a lot more data for what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is now create a brand new worksheet. And if you go back to the GitHub repo and go back to the ingest folder, you'll see that there's a file in here called tastybites.sql. 307 lines of code. We're not going to write this from scratch. I'm not going to walk you through every single line. But what's actually pretty powerful is that what you did in this previous file, which only took roughly 20 lines or so, with just that, you can actually understand this entire file. And I think that's pretty powerful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on copy raw file. I'm going to go back to my account. I'm going to paste everything in here. And there, with the exception of if I think one command, everything else in here, you've already done. You did in the previous worksheet. So what I'm going to do is everything is programmatically ready for me to run. So I'm not going to run everything line by line. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up here and just click run all, and Snowflake will take care of running the entire file from top to bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and click on run all. And then while it's doing that, so this is going to load close to a gigabyte, just under, of data from S3. And you can see here, so for example, selecting our role in our database programmatically with the use role and use database commands, creating a bunch of schemas. You did this already. Maybe the one thing I want to call out is creating this compute resource. So we create a virtual warehouse, and virtual warehouse here is referring to the compute resource that you want to use to load the data. And so they come in different t-shirt sizes, from extra small all the way to 6XL. You can see here that we create an extra large. And all we're specifying is the compute resource to use when loading the data. And we're specifically saying we want this one because it has this much computing power. It has a lot more memory. It can have more nodes. It can process a lot more data faster. So we create this warehouse called demo build warehouse with some settings. Here's the file format. Again, we point to the stage, create a bunch of tables here. We create one view. A view is different from a table in the sense that you might want to create a view that you're going to be querying a lot. Many times they're used for analytics purposes or for sharing purposes. You're going to visualize some data there. They're not necessarily the raw data from all the tables. It could be a select set of columns that you want to show, maybe a few dimensions. So here, a couple of views, and then a bunch of copy and twos, again, from from S3 into those target tables. So you did this in the previous worksheet. And then here's that warehouse. We just drop it because we don't need it anymore after we load. All right, so that's it. And if you want to go back to confirm that everything was created, if you go to databases, open Tasty Bytes, you have a lot more here. Now you have 2 new schemas, 3 new schemas actually, some views, some more data. I think one of these tables has like, 56 million rows up here. So quite a lot of data ingested, and I think it took 5 seconds or so. All right, so let's go back to what we were trying to build. We're trying to build this pipeline that can track weather in the city of Hamburg, Germany. We've already loaded our data as part of the ingestion piece of the framework. So we got data from the marketplace. We got data from an S3 bucket. We now need to transform our data. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go back and create a brand new worksheet. So click on projects here, click on worksheets, and open up a new SQL worksheet. Now, this is not going to be a SQL webinar, so I'm mostly going to be able to walk you through what the SQL is doing, but there's quite a bit of SQL here, and you don't need to know it in detail, but you do need to know what it's doing and what it's creating in Snowflake. So to get that code, you can go back to the GitHub repo, and now we're in the transform part of the framework. So click on 01 transform. And then I'm going to click on the SQL folder here, and we have a few files here. Let's click on Hamburg sales and go ahead and copy that and bring it back into your Snowflake account into that worksheet you just created. Let me share this. It looks like somebody wanted this a little bit bigger, so I went ahead and zoomed in a bit. So hopefully that's helpful. Make this a little bit smaller. Oh, okay. That's what happens when you zoom in a lot. All right, so this is 80 lines of SQL. What exactly are we doing? So the first thing that we're going to do is set our context. So again, role, warehouse, and database. If you select these and just run, this does the same thing that you could use a UI to do, but I've gone ahead and set my context. Now we want to explore sales in the city of Hamburg, and so that's what this SQL query here does. If you put your cursor on line 6 and go ahead and hit run, got an error. Oh, right, we have an error because we need to fill out some things here. But this will help me understand sales in the city of Hamburg, Germany. So a couple of things are missing here. Line 16, we want to add our country. So let's type in Germany. And then we want to add our city, Hamburg. And we want to look at sales in the month of February. This should run now. And you can see the analysts were right. A bunch of dates where the sales were 0. We want to understand why. Let's go ahead and create a view that is going to add that weather data that we took from the marketplace to all of the cities where the Tasty Bites franchise operates. And we're going to create this view because we're going to use it in a later part of this lab. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, we have about 10 more minutes. We'll see if we can finish this pipeline. We have this view. Let's now look at the daily temperatures in Hamburg, Germany for any anomalies. So if you run this query here on line 40, you'll see all the temperatures. I think it's easier to look at this in a chart. I'm very zoomed in, so it's kind of hard to see, but I don't see any anomalies here in temperatures. Let's look at wind speeds. And again, I'm very zoomed in here, but the wind speeds say there are a few here that actually spike up to hurricane force winds. So you can see the spike here, 66. So let's go ahead and create a view that tracks this because we now suspect that sales are not just impacted by the ambient temperature outside, but actually by the wind speed. People are not going outside in hurricane force winds to buy tacos. So we're going to go ahead and on line 70, we're going to create a view called, let's see here. So it says add name of view on line 70. Let's type in wind, lowercase, wind speed underscore Hamburg. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And if I go back to results, you'll see it was successfully created. You can go back and explore, but just in the interest of time, I'm not going to expand that. All right, so we have a view. We have some views that we'll use as we try to deliver this kind of track information to our analysts at the very end. Now, some of this data is actually being tracked only in Fahrenheit for temperature and in inches for precipitation. And we should actually write some code here to convert that to the metric system because we are tracking a city in Europe after all. So in this case, Germany. So we want to look at our temperature in Celsius and we want to look at precipitation in millimeters. And the way to do this, to kind of do computations where you need to derive new values from existing values, is through a user-defined function. And you can think of user-defined functions as helper functions that you can use to do this kind of thing. So let's go ahead and create a new SQL worksheet. We'll go back to the repo. I'm going to go to SQL. I have 7 minutes to finish this pipeline. So let's see if we can do this. So udf.sql. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back into my worksheet. I'm going to paste it in. Nothing too crazy happening here, but I do want to show you the power of user-defined functions. I have 2 functions here. One is called Fahrenheit to Celsius. It's pretty self-explanatory what it does. I'm writing the math here in SQL. Here I have another one that converts inches to millimeters. Same kind of thing. Couple of things that we need to fill out is, again, create or replace is the command that you'll use frequently to create objects in Snowflake. For functions, for user-defined functions, same thing. So we'll just type in function as a keyword. And again, on line 13. So that I was on line 5 previously. Now I'm on line 13. So we're creating functions. I'm going to run all. Now I have 2 functions that were created in the analytics schema. And if I go back and you can actually see the functions living in my database as objects, which I think is pretty neat. So we now have functions that we can use to provide more data in our final data product. So let's go ahead and use them. And so we're going to create brand new views that actually apply these UDFs to existing columns and create new UDFs. Let's go back to the GitHub repo. And in the same folder called SQL, I have a file called updated Hamburg SQL. We'll copy this entire file again. I'm going to go back into Snowflake. I'm going to create a brand new SQL worksheet. All right. And what exactly am I doing in this SQL? I'm creating a new view. We'll give it a name in a bit, but you can see here, this is where I am applying my user-defined functions to existing columns. So I'm saying, hey, apply analytics.Fahrenheit to Celsius to this value, right? And Snowflake will invoke that user-defined function when it's creating this. And we can use that as we're creating a view. I think that's pretty neat because the power of this means that it can scale quite at a very high level. So this is pretty neat. We do this for the temperature. We also do this for the precipitation, inches to millimeters. Let's go ahead and give it a name. So we're going to call it on line 6, weather underscore Hamburg. I think that's all we have to do here. Yeah. So we're just creating new columns that contain that information, and we're using the UDFs to actually create those columns. Run all. So go from the top to the bottom, 4 minutes to see if we can finish this pipeline. We now have this view. Okay, so this has all the information that we need. We can go back to data, and if you want to take a look at it, we have it in harmonized, view, weather Hamburg. You can look at a data preview that actually has all the information. Let's quickly just look at the columns though, just because I'm running out of time here. So we have these new columns that were created from the UDFs. We have our information. How do we actually share this with an end user, in this case, or an analyst? So we've just completed transformations. We use SQL to transform our data and come up with these insights that we want to deliver now. So how do we deliver this? We're going to do this by creating a Streamlit and Snowflake application. So to do this, click on Projects, then click on Streamlit. At the top right, create Streamlit app. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to leave mine as is. App location, I'd like for this to live right next to the view that has the data that we're going to visualize. So I'm going to change this view from public, the schema from public to harmonized. And I'm going to leave the compute resource the same. So just the default. And I'm going to create this. If you're not familiar with Streamlit, it is a very popular, very well loved open source Python library for creating beautiful data apps in Python end to end. No HTML, no CSS, or any fancy front end framework required. And what's really neat is that it's natively available within Snowflake as Streamlit in Snowflake. So when you start up a Streamlit application, you'll see this boilerplate code that contains some Python that shows you how to create an example Streamlit app. Now, we're not going to use any of this, but the editor, and if you can't see this editor, you should see a button at the top that says edit, and the editor will open. I don't need any of this code, so I'm just going to go ahead and select everything and throw it away. I'm going to go back to my repo. I'm going to go to the folder that's called o2_deliver. The file is called streamlit.py. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back to Snowflake. I'm going to share this tab and show you what I'm doing here. So paste it in, and I'm kind of really zoomed in here, so you can't really see everything. Let me zoom out just a bit. But all I'm doing here is importing my Python packages as if I would in a Python file outside of Snowflake. And you can still use VS Code or your preferred development environment to connect to Snowflake and develop Streamlit applications outside of Snowflake. But this is so convenient. It's so easy. My application lives right next to my data, so it's really easy to just talk to Snowflake and grab my data that way. With this code, I'm going to click Run, and I should get an error. And that's because on line 14, we need to insert the name of our view. And that's the view that we just created. So let's type in tasty_bites dot harmonized dot what was it? Weather. Uh-oh, I'm almost at time. Let's go. Weather Hamburg and click run. I'm hoping that's the right name. And I see something rendering, and there it is. So I think this is 54 lines of Python. This is a Streamlit application delivering my insights to the analysts, and that's it. We created an end-to-end data pipeline in 30 minutes where we took raw data from through ingestion, transformation, and delivery. We did not get to automate, but that's okay. You have now enough knowledge to go out and explore and figure out how to upskill what you learned today. But this is it. So if you go back to your data, you'll see you can actually to your projects. Of course, you can now access this application when you want. One thing I didn't quickly show is if you want to share this now with your data analyst, this is where you would do it, and they would get, let's say that they have a role called analyst or something. You can assign it to that role. All right, that's it. I know we're at time, and I know we have to get into questions. So let me just quickly say thank you so much. I hope you learned something new. I hope you were able to follow along. If not, you have the code. You'll be able to rewatch the webinar. This is a QR code that will take you to my LinkedIn profile. I am posting all sorts of tips and tricks on how to use Snowflake, and generally just methods in data engineering. There frequently, so weekly at least. And you can follow me and just check out what I'm posting. I'm hoping that what I post there will be helpful for you. So thank you so much. Looking forward to connecting. I'm going to stop sharing for now, and then I think we can dive into questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gilberto. I have to say, 5 minutes ago when you're like, I'm just going to build a Streamlit app, I was like, we're going over time. But it was amazing how quickly you got through that. So that's very cool that it is like, it's mostly automated. You got your data sets there. It's like build the app and then.
Exactly.
You're
These platforms, I mean, data platforms today are really at a new level, and Snowflake is definitely no exception. Like you can see, you can do everything in Snowflake now. I ingested, I transformed, and my application is inside my data platform, which years ago that was maybe like, a radical idea, but now it's becoming the norm to have that application to live closer to your data. So that's pretty neat.
Nice. So we'll go to audience questions in a moment. I've got a couple of questions to you while waiting for the audience to ask more things. So one is about the SQL use. So you made very heavy use of this create or replace function. Just talk me through like why you like create or replace, and do you have any other sort of SQL tips and tricks for data engineers?
Yeah, I mean, there are actually different ways of creating objects in Snowflake. Create or replace for me is just kind of my go-to. And if I'm ever recreating a demo, it is good to have create or replace. So what create or replace does, it'll create the object if it exists. I'm sorry, it'll create the object if it doesn't exist. If it does exist, it'll drop it and replace it. And so that's why I find it really neat for demos at least. But obviously there are other use cases. You don't have to use create or replace. There's create if not exist. There's lots of other ways, basically, of being able to create objects that account for whatever it is you're trying to do. So just be careful about which one you decide to use. Go to the documentation. It's pretty straightforward, but I use create or replace as kind of my go-to object creation command. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. And I have a question about the ingest transform deliver. I think I got the right around the
ITD.
ITD.
Yeah.
So this sounds a little bit like extract, load, transform, which is kind of this more common paradigm, and then there's the previous one, extract, transform, load, things like that. Just talk me through like the order of like what you're doing here and how.
That's right. Yeah. No, so it's. You may have heard the acronyms ETL and ELT, a lot in this industry, and of course that is commonplace today. What the ITD framework does is really try to abstract away those mechanisms a little bit more through kind of a learning framework, so more of a contextualization framework where you can say, given a pipeline, how do you understand it? And rather than necessarily just stick to ETL or ELT, you can just level up a little bit and say, well, how is this data being loaded? So that's ingestion, right? How is this data being manipulated or wrangled? That's transformation, which is present already in ETL and ELT. And then there's delivery. And delivery is a little bit different in the context of ITD versus how you might think about it for ELT and ETL. And that's because there are lots of different ways to deliver, if you will, an end data product. And so I kind of use that to highlight that with Snowflake, you have several options. Today, I just use Streamlit and Snowflake, but you could publish a data set, for example, if you wanted to. You could publish an application to the marketplace. So lots of different ways. I like to think about it as more of a my compass. Given any pipeline, how do I contextualize myself? So I find ITD very helpful in that respect.
Okay, I like the sort of high level abstraction. That's pretty good. Cool. All right, let's go to some audience questions. This first question comes from Bonventure. So, saying, as an aspiring data engineer, what are the key skills I should focus on to work effectively with Snowflake? So, I mean, we looked at the marketplace. We looked at like writing some SQL. We looked at using Streamlit to create dashboards. Are there any other things?
Yeah, I mean, if you're brand new to or wanting to get into the field of data engineering, what I just described in terms of ETL, ELT, ITD, that's a good place to understand exactly what you might need to learn. And so, what I mean by that is it's good to have at least one language under your tool belt. I don't want to recommend one over another, but SQL is, of course, very popular. You saw it used heavily. So, there are data engineers that use SQL only, but then there are data engineers that use SQL and Python or mostly Python. So, you see SQL and Python as the core languages, so I'd recommend really getting a grip on those. And then as far as other skills, I mean, the thing about data engineering is data is originated in all sorts of sources, from sensors on machines on a floor to files that are in your S3 bucket being generated by an application or something. So really, it's going to be thinking about how you can how you can have fluidity across several different tools. So as an example, today I talked about S3 buckets. It might be a good skill, for example, to get familiar with AWS and understand how it works. I happen to use AWS. You don't have to use AWS. You can go to other analogous kind of cloud providers there, but that was just my specific use case today. Um, so SQL, Python, so writing code, VS Code, GitHub, source control. So just knowing source control, that's going to go a long way to actually being able to build reliable and robust pipelines where you're not doing necessarily everything in a live production environment, but you're able to collaborate with your teammates. That's really high level, and I don't want to get too granular and be very prescriptive about exactly the technology that you need. I think you'll find more that once you start using ITD and implementing it, the technologies that will speak to you will kind of come out of that, and you'll kind of follow that. But ITD and ELT and ETL is kind of like the framework you could use to kind of orient yourself in terms of what you need to learn. Yeah.
Okay, that seems like good advice. Always plenty to learn, and of
Yeah,
course, yeah, plenty of data camp courses to get you started there as
for
well.
sure.
Wonderful. All right, so next question is from Ayushi. So Ayushi is asking like, how do we schedule pipelines? How do you maintain pipelines? Oh, and disadvantages. I don't know if you're okay talking about the
Yeah.
last one, but go for it.
In my eyes, there are no disadvantages of using Snowflake. No, but to get to your questions here. So actually, can you pull it up again? The first two.
uh,
So can
First
we
one was
schedule pipelines?
scheduling
Yeah,
pipelines.
absolutely. So that's the automation aspect that we didn't get to touch on today. So your go-to feature in Snowflake to natively schedule pipelines is called tasks. And there are different ways of creating tasks in Snowflake today. There are serverless tasks now and triggered tasks, which are pretty neat. Based on an action that happens in Snowflake, this task will run. Or serverless, where you don't have to specify the compute warehouse or the compute resource on your own. You can let Snowflake right size it for you and just pick the right compute resource for you at the time when that task is running. Now that's if you're going to be managing your own tasks. And there's also task graphs. You can make a task A dependent on task B, so forth and so on. But we also have Snowflake notebooks, and you can actually schedule notebooks. So rather than deal with individual tasks, if you have a notebook with code, and you want to run that thing end to end on a 24-hour basis, it's easy to do that in the UI. So that's another way of looking at that. And then you are able to observe all this through a DAG inside of Snowflake as well. So you can look at the entire DAG graph as well. So those are how you would schedule your pipelines. Disadvantages, I don't know that I can speak to that today. um, here's what I will say on the platform. if you're a data engineer, and this kind of speaks to the question around like learning new technologies around data engineering, if you're new to this, you can expect to use many different tools when you're going to be a data engineer. And I see that often when I speak to builders. They're not just using one platform, they're using several. They're not just using one third party tool, they're using several. And they're figuring out ways to connect these because that is the nature of data. How do you get data from source A to this place and then pump it here and then transform it there and deliver it there? So that's why there's no linear path to understanding data engineering. It's really more like a graph. Um, with Snowflake, a lot of the things that you might need a third party tool to do are in Snowflake as is. So someone just asked, for example, around, I mean, they just asked about scheduling, and I talked about tasks. It's very common for data engineers to use 30 third party tools to manage tasks. You can do that in Snowflake, or you can do that on, your third party tool. So I like to think about it more as like a lot of these features are now native inside of Snowflake. The choice is up to you on what you want to use. It's going to be very dependent on your use case, what your team is comfortable with, what your data environment is like. So, I can speak to that aspect of Snowflake becoming a more expanded platform in that sense.
All right, very cool. Yeah, it seems like it's just a big platform with lots of features, lots to learn, of course. Okay, we're kind of at time, so I do want to do one more audience question actually, but before we
Sure.
get to that, tomorrow we've got a session on data governance. So if you're interested in data engineering, you should also be interested in data governance. So we're talking about how data governance feeds into being able to do things like data-driven decision making, sort of help your organization. So please do come back for that. The other question I wanted to get to before we wrap up. I hope this is fairly simple. This is about the data ingestion part, and I
Yeah.
think it's like an easy question because it's like, well, it do asking like, what happens if you data in HTML files, Excel files? I feel like you can that's like easy mode. You can import those no problem.
I
Um,
mean, yeah. Go
are
ahead.
there any kind of file formats which you can't do? Like, what's the limit of like where you can get your data from?
It's more like limitations on trying to do specific things with file formats. So, I mean, someone here just asked about Excel files. So, try to download that XLSX file and go and upload it. I think you'll run into some limitations. But I mean, in general, Snowflake, I can't even remember the number because it's so large at this point. It has support for the most exotic file formats out there. I had a friend who actually loaded this file format. I forget what it was called. I had never heard of it before, but it was used for XML dumps. And Snowflake didn't even hesitate. It just loaded it, and we were able to actually extract insights from that data. So there's nothing that stands out. I'm literally just go out there, try it out. You can use a modal. There's an easier way to load data into Snowflake. You don't have to necessarily go into the stage and do the copy into. I showed that today because it's going to be very common if you are building end-to-end pipelines. But you can literally just drag and drop. And, as if you were just using a computer application, drag and drop a file, try it out, see what you run into, really try and test the platform. If something doesn't work, let us know, reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm connected to the product managers there. I can pass along your feedback.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, so there's a good homework challenge for the audience. Try and find a file format that's going to break Snowflake. Yeah. Cool. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up because we are past time. So thank you once again, Gilberto.
Sure.
That was very, very cool stuff.
Thank
Yeah,
you for having me.
cool. Yeah, and hope to see you all again tomorrow. Thank you to everyone in the audience who asked a question. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. See you all again soon. All right. Bye.
Thank you.